Back in 1990, Raven Software was founded by brothers Steve and Brian Raffel, with the vision of creating RPG games. In 1993, they got to realize some of that vision when id Software licensed their engine to Raven for the creation of Shadowcaster. The engine was a post-Wolfenstein version of the one John Carmack was working on, slower than the Doom engine, but more suited to the exploration playstyle of Shadowcaster. Raven Software teamed up with id for a second time before it got sucked into the abyss that is Activision, and released Heretic in late 1994. It was originally planned as another RPG, at least until John Carmack said, just do it like Doom and add the fantasy flavor. Which isn't really surprising coming from Mr. Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. Speaking of porn, Heretic would go on to be an award-winning title and supposedly featured in Playboy. I don't know if this is true or not. I looked through the archives, but I kept getting distracted and couldn't find it. I picked up Heretic on Steam for something like $2, but instead of playing it through there, I'm using GZ Doom. I'm still trying to figure GZ Doom out, and the default settings were throwing me for a loop at the start of this one. See, I went into Heretic completely blind, so I thought something was off when I could look up and down, so I ended up shutting off free look because I thought it was a mistake. Turns out that's just something Raven had worked into the game, which is great because it adds another level of depth and immersion to the game, even if it is nauseating at times. I played through the first episode with free look off, and it wasn't until I was doing the thumbnail for this video when I came across an ad from a 1994 issue of Computer Gaming World. And there it was, so I turned it back on and had to relearn how to play the game. I also didn't look at the manual until I was done playing through this game, and I think I'm going to do that at least before I start some of these playthroughs, because man was I confused by a lot of the stuff in this one. And I've got to say, at the risk of committing a little bit of heresy myself,
God, I hate what you fucking done to me.
Being a fantasy nerd, I like Heretic way more than Doom. So the story goes, you're part of an ancient elven race. The world that you're a part of is taken over by the 3 Serpent Riders. After they conquer the place, all but Despair will leave. Then there's some extra graphic detail in the manual. Heretic has 5 different skills to choose from, and all the names are a terrible play on Old English. Thou needeth a wet nurse, yellow bellies are us, bringest them oneth, thou art a smite meister, black plague possesses thee. I ended up playing on bringest them oneth, and I think if I'd started the game with free look on, I should have kicked it up a notch. But I can guarantee you this will not be my last playthrough of this. Episode 1 is the City of the Damned. It starts out in the docks, and it's a pretty good introductory level. You start out with the Elven Wand, and it's an okay starting weapon. From what I can tell, it functions just like Doom's pistol, where semi-auto firing is pinpoint accurate, but Letner Buck sends projectiles all over the place. The ammo pickups come in wand crystals or geodes, and on this difficulty, ammo was everywhere. There's no time wasted introducing the first enemy of the game. The Gargoyle is a small and annoying airborne enemy, melee only and easy enough to take down. There's this weird gimmick that causes the airborne enemies to drift away when hit by an attack, and it was the same with the Cacodemons in Doom, so I'm assuming it's a quirk of the engine and not the game design, but it's a minor annoyance at best. Obviously I'm not playing the 1994 version here, but with the Doom software rendering on, the level detail is actually really nice. The moving water, dancing flames and the braziers, and even the vine-covered pillars immediately give it this fantasy vibe. Like Doom, there's some key hunting that takes place in this one, yellow, green, and blue, and I like how the doors are actually marked with statues holding the correct colored orb versus having a door that's just outlined with the color. Through the yellow door to meet the second enemy of the game, the Golem, which is another melee-only enemy, and they probably have my favorite death animation in the game. The carcass falls to the ground and you get to see its soul leaving its body. It's a nice touch. Also, like Doom, Heretic is packed full of secrets. The first one I came across had the gauntlets of the Necromancer in it, about the equivalent to Doom's chainsaw, but so much better. First off, there's no shitty chainsaw sound. Instead, you get a crack of thunder as lightning starts shooting from your hands. This thing is great for taking out most of the lower tier enemies, and it stun locks them so you can tear through enemies without taking too much damage. The boosted version switches the lightning from green to red. The damage output seems a little bit higher, but it also functions like a life leech. I should have tried it out on one of the bosses, but I forgot all about it. In the second secret I found the ethereal crossbow, and this is the closest thing to a shotgun in the game, and if I'm being honest, it's one of my favorite weapons. Fires 3 bolts at a time and packs a mean punch, and can take down some of the toughest enemies in the game with relative ease. The boosted version just fires more projectiles. Through this teleporter onto this water covered area, and I love how the water pushes you around as if it was flowing. If you're moving upstream, it slows you way down, but oddly enough, it also affects your projectiles. I mean, it was 1994, so the fact that the environment was pushing you around at all is pretty impressive. In the same area I ran into the Undead Warrior, one of the tougher enemies in episode 1. They're usually found in groups, especially in the second half of the episode. They throw axes as their attack, and they're easy enough to dodge. In fact, all the attacks in this game are pretty easy to dodge because there aren't any hit scanners. I did run into some ghostly versions of these guys later on, but I don't think they're any tougher. You just have to be a little smarter about the weapon choice. I did find the bag of holding here as well, and it increases your ammo capacity, which comes in very handy. The level exit is usually a switch or a teleporter hidden behind a door marked with this cross trident. The dungeons is a pretty decent map. I don't think anything really stands out, just a lot of stone corridors, you know, as if you were in a dungeon. I witnessed the first bit of infighting at the start of this one, and it comes in really handy later in the game. There's quite a few switches to be found in Heretic as well. Some open secrets and some are needed to progress, but it wasn't really that tough to find any of them. Another item I came across for the first time was a torch. Pretty handy for lighting up those dark areas, but I don't think the dark areas in Heretic are nearly as dark as Doom. But maybe that's just in the settings. Another new weapon in this level as well, the Dragon Claw, and it takes down some of the tougher enemies in episode 1 fairly quickly. The weapon itself is a little bit odd. Kind of looks like a helmet that sits over the fist, and the boosted attack sends mace balls flying all over the map. I do like how a lot of these maps are designed in such a way that you don't have to do a ton of backtracking. There are secrets or just alternate paths that loop back to previous areas, which is really nice. It's also pretty common throughout the game that picking up items and keys will trigger traps, but that's a minor complaint. I also came across the Shadow Sphere in a secret in this level, and I honestly don't remember using it at all in the game. I'm assuming I did, but I don't recall any noticeable effect. Into the gatehouse, and right off the bat there's a new enemy. The Fire Gargoyle. Another version of the gargoyle, but this one will pitch fireballs at you. They soak up way more damage than the vanilla version, but they're easy enough to deal with, but a swarm of these guys can be a little bit chaotic. Some of the lighting effects in this map can be a bit seizure inducing, and I don't know if this is meant to be an effect caused by the torches in the room, but my aging eyes had a bit of trouble adjusting to this one, and thankfully it wasn't very common throughout the game. One thing I will say about Heretic is the names of the maps make perfect sense. As I was playing through this, I thought there was no question as to what the level was designed to be. I was warned about Heretic being slightly confusing at times, and the guard tower was the first map where I was wondering where I was supposed to be going. It's a massive sprawling map with no clear direction. Not that it's bad, I really enjoyed exploring this one. There's a ton of little rooms to check out. I ran into the Nitro Golem for the first time in this map, and it's just another version of the Golem, but this time with a ranged attack. The attack itself is a homing projectile, but it's nothing too hard to avoid. Thankfully it doesn't turn on a dime like the Vor from Quake. It does produce one of the most annoying sounds imaginable, and if there's multiple of these guys, it turns into an ear-bleeding roar. The other new enemy of the map is the Disciple of Despair. These guys are the toughest enemy of episode 1 with the exception of the final boss. When I first ran into these, I was thinking I'd hate every encounter, but they ended up being one of my favorite enemies in the game. The 3 energy balls were annoying at first, but it was a refreshing change of pace compared to the straight line and easily avoidable attacks of the other monsters. The Disciples also chant, but it's indistinguishable unless you play it backwards. The Citadel is another sprawling and slightly confusing map. The first time I played through it, it took me a while to figure out that I could just sprint across this gap to the yellow key. I was about 24 minutes into this when I got killed by a Disciple, and I had to take a step away from the game for a little bit, because fuck me do they do a ton of damage up close. This map is a pretty good mix of open arenas and fights in tight corridors. A lot of this one would have been a lot easier if I had free look on, because there's a ton of elevation changes. One thing I am confused about though, and maybe someone will enlighten me in the comments, when I grabbed the Wings of Wrath in episode 1, it automatically used the item, but later in the game it just went straight into my inventory. I don't know why this happened, but it was much nicer saving it until I wanted to use it. I think this is the first time I found a map scroll as well. It's handy and reveals the rest of the map, but I don't think it's as good as Doom's map, where Doom's map basically showed you where the secrets were, but I guess it leaves a little bit of mystery to the game. The Cathedral is probably my favorite map of episode 1, and the stained glass windows just add that pop of color that break up the map nice. There were a few parts in this one that were confusing for me, like this room with the altar. That took me a while to figure out. I found the Time Bomb of the Ancients in this map as well, a set it and forget it item with a short fuse. I didn't really use them that much because the weapons in this game are pretty good. In fact, I didn't really use the inventory items as much as I should have, especially because I didn't realize you can only take one of each through when you finish a map. I didn't figure this out until about halfway through the game, but it's probably a good thing because I would have been stacked with the Tomes of Power by the end of the episode. I spent a good 25 minutes wandering around this one and I still missed the exit to the secret level. I think the Crypts is probably the weakest level of episode 1 for me, and I think it has a lot to do with my experience level. There was a couple clear-cut chances to have a bit of fun with it, and I decided to shoot my way out. Like this spot shot with the Morphovum and the Golems. I've picked this item up a few times now and I still haven't used it. I also think the map design is a little bit lacking. Lots of big open areas with only a handful of enemies in them, and mostly gargoyles at that. The crypts themselves were nicely done, but the rest of it really just didn't turn my crank. The final level of the episode and the lead up to the final fight is okay. Just a shitload of gargoyles and the undead over a giant pit. But this part wasn't all bad. This was the first time I cracked open a Tome of Power, and Christ is that fun. It's basically just a more powerful alternate fire, and the life leech effect on the gauntlets is just ridiculous. After that, it's into a room full of green exploding balls and a whole pile of nitro golems, and the green balls kept respawning, so that was a pain in the ass. The final boss of the episode also happens to be my least favorite enemy of the entire game. Not one, but 3 Iron Liches. They're not the worst because they're too spongy or anything like that, but because of their attack. Well, one of their 3 attacks. First is the fire attack, just a wall of fire that's easy enough to avoid. Next is this blue crystal attack, and it'll send fragments flying around once it hits a wall or something else. And if you eat the whole thing, it does do some pretty good damage. The worst attack though is this fucking tornado. It follows you around, picks you up, spinning you around, slamming you into things. It's even worse in tight spaces. I died a lot trying to get through this one, and I think I killed the Liches on round 2, but got absolutely wrecked by the Disciples right after that. The Graveyard is the secret level of episode 1, and it's not bad. Most of the enemies are ghostly versions of the regular ones. There are some really large moving set pieces, which is pretty neat, but my ears were bleeding by the end of this one because there's way too many of the fucking nitro golems. Episode 2 is a bit more challenging. I bumped up the difficulty a notch and made it about 3 minutes into the first map before I got absolutely fucked. So I changed the difficulty back to bring us the Monolith, and I'm still playing with free look off at this point. You figure the fact that it says default settings would tip me off, but nah. The Crater introduces the Were-Dragon, and one of the things that I can truly appreciate about Heretic is the scale of some of the enemies. Were-Dragons tower over most other enemies, they spit fireballs, and that's really about it. They're a bit spongy, but nothing a few shots from the crossbow can't deal with. There's a shitload of them in this level, and there was even more when I had the difficulty cranked up a bit. This level feels like the first map in the episode. It's nothing special and kind of just generic. It's not bad by any means, and by the end of it you'll have the crossbow and the dragon claw back in your hands. The start of the lava pits is packed with fire gargoyles, and it's a little hectic at first trying to dodge all the projectiles. There's another new enemy here as well, the saber claw. We'd have a better look at him if I was using free look, but that's another thing. They're another melee only enemy, and these guys do move pretty quick. They also don't seem to move in a straight line like most of the other enemies. They seem to zigzag towards you, which makes it a bit harder to hit. They have a relatively weak attack and they're knocked back by some of your weapons, so keeping them at bay is pretty easy. I found the Hellstaff in a secret in this map. I was trying to figure out what the ruins I had been picking up were for, and this was the answer. It's probably my favorite weapon in the game. Fast fire rate and high damage. It also has one of my favorite boosted attacks. Leaves behind an area of effect that rains down damage on the monsters. Overall, this map is pretty good, but there's way too many gargoyles. The River of Fire is exactly what it sounds like. This level is a maze-like series of corridors that all look very similar. This one took me quite a while to get through, just because so many of the areas look the same. Once I got the lay of the land, this map turned out to be pretty enjoyable. This was also the first time I used the Morphovum, and god is that good. It's a funny little gimmick. They still attack you and the effects will wear off after a certain point. I also found the Phoenix Rod at some point in this map. It's essentially Heretic's rocket launcher, and ammo is pretty limited for this thing, even with the bag of holding. So I didn't use it that often. And I do not understand why the boosted attack is a flamethrower. It just seems kind of odd having a weapon that causes splash damage change to something that's a short range attack. I also like the HUD setup in this game. The chain that moves between the 2 demon heads is a nice touch. Next up is the Ice Grotto. This one had the potential to turn into a shitty map because of all the ice physics. It just makes it difficult to dodge some of the projectiles, which isn't so bad on this difficulty, but I imagine on the higher skills with faster projectiles, it could be a problem. Once you're through the yellow door and off the ice, the map goes from potentially shitty to a pretty decent entry. There's not much more to say about this one. I missed the exit to the secret level again, and came back after I beat the Sparrow. Coming from the Ice Grotto to a map called the Glacier, I was worried this one was going to be on a sheet of ice the whole time, but there's almost no ice at all, except for a small bit in the middle of the map. Instead, the map reminds me of a large temple. It's pretty good overall. There doesn't really seem to be any benefit of playing the secret levels other than having another map to play. Maybe you'll come back with more armor, but you've already got the full arsenal and you can only have one of each item. It was at this point that I figured out that free look was actually a thing in Heretic, so I turned it on and pretty much had to relearn how to play the game, and I'm blaming this death on that. I don't think the Catacombs is a bad map. The design and architecture are really nice. I felt like the pacing of this one was a little bit on the slow side. There was quite a bit of time backtracking because of teleporters or switches. This is where I really noticed that the secrets now trigger monster closets a lot of the time. I don't remember where I found the fire mace, but it's a high risk, high reward weapon, and if I'm being honest, I don't really like it. The regular attack is okay, shoots mace heads out at a fast pace, but the damage seems lacking for the amount of ammo it uses. And the boosted attack is insanely powerful. One shot kills almost all monsters, but the projectiles are massive and slow, and it seems like you have to have it jammed down the monster's throat to use it effectively. The Labyrinth. I like this map quite a bit. The main hub is pretty indistinguishable, but the rest of the Labyrinth is a series of unique areas, like this wide open area with all these gargoyles and saber claws where I get to use the free look to my advantage for the first time. There's also this area with the tight and winding corridors filled with were-dragons that I really enjoyed. This area is pretty maze-like, but not so much that it was frustrating. This is the first time I tried the Chaos device, and found out that it takes you back to the start of the map. I think this is the only time I ever used one, other than when I used it to get to the secret level of episode 2. I just don't see the point of it. Maybe if you're in a pinch and need to run from a fight. The Great Hall is probably my least favorite map of episode 2. It's more of a confusing mess than the level called the Labyrinth, and there's a fair bit of switch hunting and backtracking. I also don't think the design of the level is that aesthetically pleasing. A lot of the same wall textures and dull colors from start to finish. I was a bit confused going into this one because I thought it was E2M7. So at first, I thought this was kind of a shit level design. The whole map is one massive arena filled with a variety of monsters. The boss of episode 2 is the Molitar, and they are tough. The Tome of Power and a shitload of ammo, and they'll go down. They've got this charge attack, which is real neat, and they're massive, so it can be kind of intimidating. They also have this fire attack that spreads out in an arc, and I don't think I ever took damage from it, so I don't know how bad the damage is. They do have this ground pound that's another fire attack, and it leaves a wall of flames on the ground. I'm pretty sure this is instant death no matter what. The first time around, I tried a few different things and ended up getting killed. The second time, there was no screwing around. Again, this is me thinking that this isn't the final fight of the episode, so I'm running around getting stocked up before heading through the portals. The third and final episode of the original trilogy, and we're on Desperil's home turf now. The storehouse fucked with me from the start. You think I would have seen this platform lowering here after I hit this switch, which would have given me the bag of holding and a dragon claw? But nope. Instead, I was running around like a tit with the wand and the gauntlets looking for another weapon. And I didn't do this just once, but 3 times. And I don't know what I was thinking here. The hamster was definitely off his wheel. This is the only time I'd ever used the staff in this playthrough. The basic melee weapon of the game, and it's pretty terrible. After I got my hands on the Dragon Claw, this level actually wasn't bad. A little tight on ammo at the start, but that's fine. There was a couple of spots fighting off some were-dragons that were too tight to dodge their attacks, so that was a bit annoying, but they don't do a ton of damage on this difficulty, so it wasn't terrible. I met the last new enemy here, this game's tank. I found their projectiles hard to avoid because they're so small compared to your own attacks, and I'd lose them behind the wall of my own muzzle flash, magic flash, I don't know, what the fuck would you call it? They deal some decent damage, and they can take some serious punishment. I guess the cesspool could be classed as a sewer level, but it's not the typical dingy place of other games. Everything is fairly bright and the strobe effect is back, and I'm pretty sure I got most of my weapons back by now. By this point in the playthrough, I'm settling into the playstyle a bit, using the exploding green balls to my advantage instead of just banging on the enemies with my weapons. I'm also settling into the fact that I need to use the items more often than I have been, especially the Tomes of Power. The Confluence is a pretty good map overall, some larger arenas mixed with some close quarters combat. I feel like the enemy roster is used really well throughout Heretic. There's a pretty good mix of all the enemies, and the only one that kind of gets left behind is the Undead Warrior, but they still pop up every now and then. Yeah, I like this one. This map is great from start to finish. A ton of different areas to explore with some pretty good traps, a couple of spots with enemies hidden behind false walls, but that's alright. My favorite thing about this map is the enemy variety. It's not just swarms of nitro golems or gargoyles, there's a little bit of everything, and the monsters seem to complement each other. The Ophidians sit back and fire at you while the Saberclaws close in. It's just good fun. This was the only secret exit of the game that I found on my first playthrough. I didn't really like the Aquifer. It's kind of hard to put in words, but the map felt like it didn't really flow together like some of the other ones, and the enemy encounters were just a bit plain. As much as I hate the Iron Liches, putting them on the other side of these bars where they can't really hit you but you can cheese them just kind of seemed like cheating. But at least now I know the Morphovum doesn't work on the Liches. The Ophidian layer bounces back a bit after the Aquifer. The first room is pretty much wide open, and as the name would suggest, this map is packed with Ophidians. There's also a few Iron Liches in a cage over here, and this time they can get their little tornadoes through, so that was fun. And look at this bullshit tornado. corridor leading up to the yellow key is really nice. I think it would have been a little bit better if there were some enemies other than gargoyles here. There's a couple secrets in this area as well, one with the hell staff and another with the torch. The stained glass opens up as well, hiding a couple disciples in here. Through the teleporter, and there's a lot of monster closets in this one, and I don't think they're overdone or too dickish, but they are pretty predictable at this point. The Halls of Fear. From an aesthetic standpoint, the Halls of Fear is a gorgeous map. Lots of color and the areas flow together pretty well. This first area had me pretty confused. I was running around wall humping looking for a way to get out of this place. Through the yellow door, and this view right here pretty much sums up the rest of the map. Just a series of chaotic fights in tight corridors. There's also a Molotov in this one, and this was fucking fun. Trapped in a pretty tight area, ducking and dodging its attacks while a few Ophidians close in on you. Then it's a duel against a couple of Iron Liches. This map is great. 10 out of 10. I have about the same feelings about the Chasm as I did about the Aquifer. This spot here where you can just cheese a bunch of enemies kind of ruins the flow. I mean, you don't have to play like this, but do I want to go toe to toe with a couple Iron Liches at some point? No. Overall, I think this is my least favorite map of episode 3, and unlike the Halls of Fear, the Molotov fight in this one is too tight. The rest of this map is just a labyrinth of tight underground tunnels with no real clear sense of direction, and it's sparsely populated with enemies, so it's not even kind of fun. Then it's out into the chasm itself, and I didn't realize this was an environmental effect at first. I thought maybe it was a tornado from an Iron Lich. Cool touch to the game, but kind of shitty placement. Would have been something neat to experience early on in the game without the Iron Liches and the Ophidians. And here we are, the final battle of the game. The start of the keep is a bit chaotic with all the teleporters taking you into tight rooms full of enemies. Pretty interesting, I think, starting you with a bit of a teleporter puzzle. Get to the last teleporter and you spawn into this large arena on this trident looking down over Desparal. As far as final bosses go, I enjoyed this one. The first phase of the fight, you actually get to fight the Serpent. It'll shoot out a single fireball at first, but as it takes damage it gets a bit more dangerous shooting 3. Once the Serpent is dead and you're left facing off against Desparal, the fight gets a bit harder. He teleports around the arena fleeing as he takes damage, but he spawns in disciples at a pretty high rate, which is the bigger challenge. Keep pounding on him until he's dead. I just wanted to go through the original trilogy in this video because, well, it's taken a while to put this one together. It's summertime in the Great White North here, and that means I've got 3 months to do 9 months worth of shit. So the videos will be coming out a bit slower than an already slow schedule. So do a guy solid and hit that subscribe button so you'll know when I get another video out. I'll do another one on the Shadow of the Serpent Rider down the road. Like I said at the beginning, for me, Heretic beats out Doom. I think all of the episodes were strong with only a few weak levels. Honestly, I wish I'd played this one sooner, because I can see it being like Duke for me. Something I've been playing for 25 years and I'm still not sick of it.